And welcome everyone to another exciting adventure on Riding Through the Unknown. I'm your host, Michael, and tonight's show, I rarely say this, but I have to be totally transparent. I have been waiting for this episode for a couple of months. I am so excited for this episode, and I know you all are in for a huge treat because tonight's subject is a topic that is controversial for academic reasons more than anything. And so that's what brings an interesting aspect to it. And so I am so honored, blessed, and privileged to have as a guest tonight someone who I feel you all are in for a huge treat and going to enjoy. And so I'm going to stop rambling over my excitement for this episode and I'm going to turn it over to my amazing guest, the one, the only megalithic experiencer extraordinaire, Dennis Stone.
Well, good evening, Mike. Thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you for coming on.
It's my pleasure. Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm up in New Hampshire. Right behind me, as a matter of fact, where I'm sitting is a place called America Stonehenge. We're about 40 miles north of Boston, right in southern New Hampshire. And it's a place that's been a mystery basically for well over 100 years. Who built it? Why did they build it? Who were the people that built it? Where did they come from? And what happened to them? Still mysteries to us to this day. It is not the only site, however. This site is probably the most complex. It's about 106 acres of land. It has a main site with a big center to it. It has a plaza, courtyard, chambers. It has a whole network of underground storm drains. It has a table we call the sacrificial table. We don't know exactly what its function was, but it looks very ceremonial. And it has uh, a ring around it, kind of standing stones that are aligned astronomically with the sun, the moon, and stars. And so it's named America Stonehenge because of the function of the site, quite similar to the most famous astronomical site in the world, which is Stonehenge in England. But its form is quite a bit different than Stonehenge. It looks more like some of the other megalithic sites. If you travel throughout Europe, there are about 50,000 megalithic sites going back before the Bronze Age, right into the Bronze Age, I guess, and then that whole period of huge stone building stopped. And we've seen quite a few of them in our travels. But throughout the Northeast, today we have about 800 locations with structures that look quite similar to what we have on America Stonehenge. They're not quite clustered together like our site. Ours is a very high density grouping of structures on that 106 acres, whereas a lot of these sites will be kind of spread out over an area. And before the show, I mentioned a couple places like North Stonington, Connecticut, that has 8,000 stone structures over a 35,000 acre town with 25 categories of structures. But they range from Quebec and Ontario, Canada, down to about Virginia. And if you travel or you look at some of the photographs of these other sites, you'll see a really striking resemblance to what you can see at our site. We have just about everything on this 106 acres that you can find throughout the rest of the Northeast, you know. And what was the purpose of these structures? That is something we're still working on, and the first research began almost 90 years ago. It was 1937. So it's been almost 90 years of research, study, investigation, and some excavation over at our site, as well as other sites around the Northeast. And we're still seeking answers to who these people were and why they built them. But our best guess is that's a ceremonial site. It's not a place where people live, not a domicile site, just because of the size of the structures, the design of the structures, and some archaeological evidence too, where people live, you usually find more of their junk remaining. I mean, we have found hammer stones, rubbing stones, stone scrapers, stone tools up here, stone points, stone cups, and other type of stone utensils found in the last 90 years. But if it was a place where people live, we think it would be a much higher concentration of junk that would have been thrown away. Not the perishable stuff. That stuff will decay, become dirt eventually. But that's true of some of the other sites too, where they have done excavations. like Stonehenge, our site we think is like a temple, probably a astronomical temple, if you will. It possibly was a burial ground. There are a couple structures, one called the D hut and the other called the East-West chamber, and they have their similar comparisons in Europe, particularly in Ireland, which I've been to. And there was the tombs, and that's what we think that these two structures may have been used for on this site. They possibly were tombs. However, we may never know because the first researcher back in 37, he actually used the technology available at the time, and he would get in there and he would excavate. He cleaned out the structures, took the dirt and the debris and the brush out of there when he first began, and he mapped it. He actually did cross-section profile plan views of the whole site. It was an MIT engineer that did all the mapping, which is, we still have all that data today. And his right-hand man, actually, Malcolm Pearson, was a photographer. So we have photographs when he visited the site in 36, when he bought it in 37, and then we began the research work. So we know what the site looked like before, during, after. Actually, we have photographs going back to 1900 at the site, too, to show what it looked like years before the first research began up there. But it doesn't seem to be, again, a place where people live. And we've seen that same kind of thing over on the other side of the ocean. Most of the megalithic sites in Europe were used as tombs, temples, and monuments. They lived in hide or wood structures, which will only last a few dozen years before they decay, and then they kind of vanish, below the soil. Now with LIDAR and other types of mapping, ground penetration radar, they're starting to find some of the habitat sites over in Europe. And that comes up in the news. Just in the last few years, they're happy to start finding where the people actually live. When you find where the people live, you can start to look at some of their trash, and you can see what type of lifestyle they have, and hopefully find out more about the people that built these sites. But in New England, we have very acidic soil. And so bones in New England, they tend to decompose within a couple hundred years. Whereas as you go over to Stonehenge and it's limestone, it's very chalky, and you can have bones lasting thousands of years over in that area, And so here, that's a problem with bones. We do have some bones in New Hampshire that have been found that do go back a few thousand years, but not at our site yet. I think they're kind of in peat bog maybe, and also in clay. But in the normal ground soils, it's acidic, and it just kind of deteriorates the bone, Well, if Mr. Goodwin had left the soil in the structures, though, almost 90 years ago, today we would take that soil and send it to a laboratory, and they could check the chemicals. And the chemicals might reveal if they were used for human burials. They might look for like potassium, calcium, certain chemicals, We weren't able to do that because Mr. Goodwin, again, he was a man in his day. He used the best technology he had back then. And they would just go in and they'd excavate. They looked for artifacts you could hold in your hands. But the dirt was dirt. They couldn't really do much with it back then. But today they can send it out to laboratories, and we can actually use dirt for dating too. Optically stimulated luminescence. That's something we used on our site in 2020. It's about $1,500 a sample, and they can tell you when the dirt saw the light of day last. So you have to do it very carefully when you take the samples. If light strikes it, you just contaminated your sample. The University of Washington's doing it. Brookhaven National Laboratory in Long Island. In fact, they sent up 2 physicists the day we had our samples being taken. And we had Dr. Feathers from the University of Washington. And the USGS out in Colorado has done a couple of New England's chambers too. So we're using that technology, and Goodwin did not have that available. He did not have radiocarbon-14 available to him. So he found bones actually in front of that chamber. And recently we had him DNA'd up at Thunder Bay, Canada. These bones have been in our collection since we opened in 1958. He had found them 20 years prior to that. And they're right in front of one of the chambers called the East-West chamber. It wasn't inside of it. I think it was right in front of it, however. And they were looked at by the Smithsonian in 1968. Dr. Lucille St. Hoyen, a physical anthropologist, looked at those bones and a couple other bones from a different chamber. And she said, I think these 3 bones are human. She goes, I can't be totally sure. I'm looking at the texture, the hardness, and their shape, and they seem to be from 3 different parts of a body. But my best guess at the end is that they're human. And here we are almost 60 years later. We did it 2 years ago. So 55 years later, we actually sent them up and had them DNA. They turned to be of Greek ancestry, which was interesting. Well, that's kind of interesting. And we only sent two of the three up to Canada. We sent them individually through customs in case somebody lost one of the bones. If it's gone, that would be a tragedy, lose something that's 90-year-old artifact. The other one we kept in safekeeping. And then we got back the remains because they have to remove part of the bone, each bone, and they have to, for the testing, you lose part of each of the bones. So we got back of the bone that was maybe 3 inches and now like half of that size. We got that part back. And we decided it was time to carbon date them. So we sent them to our laboratory we've been using since 1967 in Massachusetts. It used to be in Cambridge, Mass. They're in a town, I think, of Tewksbury, Mass, I think now. What they did is they prepared them, and they didn't have enough mass. We're going to just have one done, just one of those bones tested for date, because he said these bones were related to each other, probably the same person. And so they prepared them, and they sent them to the University of Arizona. And they were down there for, I think we didn't get the results back for almost 4 months because they were backlogged. And it turned out they weren't ancient. There was something around 1790 into the 1800s. And that was interesting to us because we know the family that lives up there. They're from England. The Patty family had the land for almost 200 years. So it's like, why would somebody, when the Patty's living there, die and decompose in front of that chamber on very thin soil, actually bedrock, a lot of it's just bedrock? Why would you leave a body? So they thought, oh, did a dog drag up these bones? But the nearest grave is about over half a mile away. And these are from three different parts of the body. It wasn't like they just grabbed part of the arm, like a radius or ulna or whatever. So we don't know, and it just, so we're still doing testing up there. It's interesting to us. And again, who was this person that died in the 1800s when the Patty family was living there, on that hilltop too, So it's just one of the mysteries of our site, but we are still using different types of dating and the latest technology that we can on the site, including LiDAR, ground penetration radar, and we did the DNA recently. So that's kind of the latest thing we just did recently.
I have an interesting question for you, and I'm not quite sure if you've ever been asked this, but you and your dad both work the land and are the caretakers, owners of the site. Did you know when you purchased the land the site was there, or was it a discovery after the fact and you were like, oh wow, now now we have this?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, Mike. That does come up occasionally. So, like I mentioned, the first archaeological work started in 37. My dad was born in 29 up in Derry, about 8 miles from here. And so he grew up in Derry, went to school in Derry and everything. He ended up going into the Coast Guard up in Labrador for the U.S. Coast Guard, right near where the Vikings landed at Lonzo Meadow. But he was there 10 years too early. Otherwise, he would have visited. The point is, he was very interested in history, Native Americans, the Vikings. And he was right across the bay from there working at a Loran station, long range navigation for the Coast Guard. And then when he came home, he had married my mom, of course, and I was born in 54. He had got a brand new job at AT&T, and he worked at Western Electric and Bell Laboratories, as an engineer. And they built their own home in Derry. The family built it. My mom did all the linseed dipping of the outside shakes for the house, and my dad, and they built the house themselves to help save money. And it was like a 4-year project. I came along in 54. The next year in the summer, my dad used to listen to this show called Yankee Yawns on WBZ radio. It's one of the biggest stations still in New England, and because it's TV today too. And that show he could listen to up in Labrador on the skip wave at night. It was AM. He could listen to that and stay in touch with New England, basically. So that was kind of cool for him. So the show was, the host was Alton Hall Blackington, a native of Maine. And it was syndicated around New England, too, on different stations in Maine and so forth. So the show that night was on a Friday night, 7:30, just listening to the AM station. And it was all about this site. He had never heard of it before. And it was a show all about these strange ruins in Salem, New Hampshire. And it really grabbed his attention. It's like this mystery right down the street. Never heard of it. It's on one of the biggest stations in the Northeast, out of Boston. It really fascinated him, the whole topic, the questions of who built it and all that, just like we're talking right now. So that week he's at a barber shop having his hair done up in the town of Derry, and he's sitting there waiting for the barber to work. He was working on another customer. My dad picks up a magazine on the table and he starts flipping through it. And all of a sudden oh my gosh, this is the place. And it was pictures. It was a feature article all about the North Salem site. And it really blew my dad's mind. And never hearing about it, then it's on the radio, and then it's in this magazine. So he said to the barber, Warren Haywood, hey, Warren, can I borrow this magazine? I got something interesting in it. He goes, well, how old is it? 1952, 3 years old. He goes, you can have it. So that weekend at my aunt and uncle's, my mom's sister and her husband, they had about 10 people. That was almost customary. Every Saturday, we went over to my cousin's house and they played cards. They had some beers. Back in those days, they smoked and stuff. I was just about a year and a half old, and my dad passed the magazine around to all these people there, and nobody, like my mom and dad, never heard of it. None of these people heard it until it got to my mom's sister and her husband. And it was the husband at first that noticed it. His name was Herb. He looks at it and goes, oh, wait a minute. This looks really familiar. And then my aunt's looking at it and goes, wait a minute. We went there in the 1930s, picnicking up on that. And they would ride their bicycles about 8 miles down the road, go up into the hill, and they went up there and picnicked right up behind where I'm sitting right now. And my dad was just kind of like, you're kidding. You've been there. So the next question was, can you find the place? In those days, the site was not open to the public. There were no road signs. There's no visitor center, no parking lot. It was just an old road that went up on top of the hill. So that Sunday, the four of them took off, left me with Grandma and my first cousin. He was just a few months older than me. And they drove around North Salem for a while. And then eventually my aunt and uncle spotted this old, road. And they said, I think that could be the road. So being 2 decades later, So they parked the car on the side of the road, I guess, and then they walked up a half a mile up the hill. They got on top, and there's the site. And it's surrounded by a chain link fence that was put up in 1937 by that first archaeologist, William Goodwin. To protect the site, he had barbed wire on top of it. The fence is still up there. It's in remarkably good shape. You think it was put up just a couple of years ago. I mean, they knew how to make things back in those days. We keep it painted with hunter green paint, which keeps it looking good. So they walked around this fence. They're all trespassing, of course. And my dad found a place underneath the chain link fence to climb under it. And it was kind of a little hard because the wire sticking down can cut you, and it's, trying to squeeze under there. And he squeezed under there, went into the main site, and he spent a lot of time. And the others didn't see him for quite a while. They lost sight of him. When he came back out, he was just kind of blown away by the whole thing, walking into the chambers and seeing the whole complex. And they're like, what do you think? He's like, I've never seen anything like this. It's simply amazing. I can't imagine a farmer or anybody building this thing for whatever purpose. It does, because my dad grew up on a farm up in Chester, New Hampshire before they moved to Derry, So he says, that look like a farm. And then he mentioned to my mom and the rest of them that he would like to maybe get involved with the research, because he was always interested in the past, history, and something about maybe opening it up as a museum or attraction to the public. And I think that's where my mom said, you got rocks in your head. Because at that time, not only were they building the house, my dad had just started that new job at AT&T Western Electric, Bell Labs, but my sister was on her way. She was born in 56, so that was coming along. And my dad was also attending college, Merrimack College. So we had all these things going on, it was kind of very, very, the plate was full basically. But my dad didn't pay attention to my mom when she said that. So he met the owner from Massachusetts, Malcolm Pearson, eventually, and he started corresponding. And the more they talked and everything, the more my dad really got interested in trying to open the place up. And by 1957, they came to an agreement for a 5-year lease, and they would open up in 58. And my dad had bought around that time, not the 20-acre site, that piece of land that Malcolm had, but some land adjacent to it, so he could put a driveway in, a parking lot, and it took fill and all bulldozing and all of that, and put in a well. It was a dug well, and a septic system, and a small visitor center. So my dad worked that whole thing out financially, and got the loan for that and all of that. And in 1958, it was on the summer solstice. We talked about the astronomy and all of that before the show. They did a soft opening, coincidentally, on the summer solstice. We didn't know anything about astronomical alignments. July, I think it's 11th to 12th. It's in my book. I always mix up those two dates. They had the hard opening, and the governor of New Hampshire came down, and they had the official opening. I kind of still have vague memories from that in 58. It was opened as the Stone Ruins of New Hampshire initially. And the first year we did okay at the place. It's always been a struggle there, but The next during the next winter, they decided to change the name to Mystery Hill Caves. And the name of the hill was never named officially on the USGS maps. Eventually, by 1968, the name today called Mystery Hill officially. But so in '59, we had the Saturday Evening Post did a full feature article on us, and we still have that magazine. And they referred to us as the America Stonehenge because of the big stones, not because of the astronomical purposes. We didn't know that yet. That was going to be around 1965. We began working on that. And not because it looks like Stonehenge, but because the author thought these big stones, the only thing I could think of, maybe besides the pyramids, is Stonehenge in England. So he called it, he named it as kind of America Stonehenge, if you will. You know, that's where that kind of came from. And the name stayed Mystery Hill Caves to '63. And due to a bit of confusion because of the word caves, that denotes something usually natural, usually in rock, or you have caverns in limestone. And some people thought maybe it was natural caves, where this is all man-made, you know, made out of granite, but it's all man-made, you know. So they dropped the word caves in 1963. And the American magazine, what was it called? The American Cave magazine had us listed as caves. I think before that, 62, 61, and back, but in '63, they got the word, we dropped the word caves, so they called it artificial caves, man-made caves, if you want. And that name stayed for the next 20 years until about 1982, when they changed the name to America Stonehenge to better reflect the astronomical alignments with the sun, the moon, and we have star alignments too at our site. So that's why the name kind of changed, you know, over the years. So it's been almost 45 years that we changed it to America Stonehenge. And it became a state historic site in 1970. So we are a state historic site officially. And it's been our family now almost, almost 70 years. That would be in '58. The 5-year lease my dad had went to '63, and then they renewed it for another 5 years. But by 1965, my dad raised enough capital to actually buy out the 20 acres from Malcolm Pearson. And Malcolm remained a friend of the family's. He had an interesting past too, because 100 years ago, his family bought a house in Upton, Massachusetts. He was 16 years old at the time. And the owner said, the former owner said to Malcolm, "Hey, young man, there's a cellar hole or cave out back of the house." And when Malcolm got out there, it's one of these chambers. It looks like a gigantic igloo, all made out of stone, 14-foot entrance, and it's 10 by 10 inside, and it's all core bolts. It's got that kind of dome shape to it. Today, that structure is part of the Upton, Massachusetts Historical Park, actually, Heritage Park. You can visit it. Malcolm's family sold it in 1970, and Malcolm sold this property here in 1965 to my dad. So until '65, Malcolm had our site, and his parents owned the Upton Chamber. And the Upton Chamber is pretty famous today. And it is aligned, they believe, with the equinox, I think it is. I'm trying to remember. It has an astronomical alignment too. And through that 14-foot entrance, and again, it looks like a big igloo, is Pratt Hill in the distance. And today there's trees there. There are cairns, piles of rocks up there. And they calculated some of those cairns, looking through that entrance towards those cairns, when you can see through there. They can do it now on computer. There's astronomical alignments with the Pleiades, which is kind of cool. So that's one of the 800 locations of these sites in the Northeast, was the Upton Chamber, and then our site. So Malcolm Pearson actually inherited this site in 1950 from that first gentleman that did the research, William Goodwin of Hartford, Connecticut. Malcolm helped him so much with the photography and taking care of things, but particularly during World War II, and there was rationing on gas and rationing on everything, that when he died in 1950, he willed the site to Malcolm Pearson. But Malcolm lived in Massachusetts before the highway system went in. It was probably a 2-hour, 3-hour drive from here. Today, you can get down there probably in about, maybe an hour and 15 or 20 minutes down to where Malcolm lived in Sutton, Mass. Maybe it's a little bit further. And so Malcolm was having a hard time. He had a family. He had his professional career. But he was having a hard time trying to keep an eye on this site, 60 miles away or whatever. So he tried to get the state of New Hampshire interested in acquiring it from him and maybe opening it up as a museum, or some sort. And that went on, I think, in 1950. We have all the paperwork. I think it was 50 or 51. It went on for about 18 months back and forth between Malcolm and the state capitol up in Concord, New Hampshire. They kept talking back and forth. But eventually the interest waned and they decided they couldn't take over the property and maybe open it up as a state park or whatever. It just never happened. So some people ask about government wanting to take it over. And that was 70 years ago that happened, and Malcolm basically, that was the end of that. So then he met my dad just a couple of years later. And then my dad actually opened it up, as we went, just mentioned. So that's kind of how the property, 1907, The History of Salem was written by Edgar Gilbert, a friend of Robert Frost. And we have several copies. It's a big book on Salem. It was started in the 1890s, and the first person, I think it was Eyre, he passed away. The gentleman that was supposed to write it, he died. So Edgar Gilbert picked it up, and by 1907, he finished it. And he talks about the site as being a wild, wonderful place among the soft pine and the rough boulders where weird tales can be woven. And he talks about the Patty family living up on the hills. So you got back to, did we discover anything up there? No, we knew all about it because of the radio show, the New Hampshire profile, and the research had gone on from 1930. So about 20 years before my dad even heard it on the radio, the research had began on this site, the archaeological study, So it wasn't a surprise. It was a surprise the place existed, but not, it's not like we walked up there and then we found. However, since 2016, we have found serpentine walls, windows, trapezoidal shapes, and a standard unit of measure. And my dad died in 2009, not knowing any of these things. And these things are found across the landscape too. So there are some cool things to be discovered, but no, we knew the site was there.
No, that's really cool. And I'm curious because, like, Stonehenge in the UK, they found the quarry for where the stones are from is like several days away. And, when we're talking BC time frame of travel, have you done any research to find where the stones originated from before being placed where they are? Or is that something you're like, no, there's no way to know that now with so much development
Wow.
in the areas?
Well, no, that's a wonderful question, actually. And in Stonehenge, we've been over there several times. And my friend Maria Wheatley lives by Avebury. I don't know if you heard of Avebury. It's one of the biggest megalithic
Yeah.
sites in the world. So she lives right by there, and she does. She's into archaeology. Her dad visited us in 1980, and she does. She writes books. She does tours to Egypt, Malta, which we've been to Malta. She does Sedona. She does Chaco. She did a thing in LA. She did a 2-day workshop. So she lives right by Avebury. She's right there. I don't know if it's Andover. We've stayed at Andover right by there. We've been there a few times. But I've only met her once when she came over here. When we were over there, we didn't know anything about her. When we went over there in the 80s and 90s, we just learned about her about 7 years ago. And she's coming back next year to do a 2-day workshop. And again, she goes out to Colorado. She does things all over the world. It's really amazing. But so they think some of the stones from Stonehenge came from Marlborough Downs. And that's where the big stones came from, Marlborough, about 15, 17 miles north of Stonehenge. There's a new theory that they actually might have got them out of the quarry, because you can find the quarry where the stones were actually removed from the bedrock. And they actually may have been, and this is not, so people hear this, I think this may still be up in the air. There's a thought that they could have been even stood up at Avebury, and then some of these were taken down. Now, Avebury still has stones, but some of these stones may have been positioned there, and then they were removed from there and then brought roughly 15, 16 miles or 17 miles down to Stonehenge and reset up, like repurposed. But the smaller stones came from Wales, almost 150 miles away up in Wales, the Preseli Mountains. Those are the smaller stones. And so they came from at least two places. One of the stones, too, at Stonehenge, they think, there's a new theory on that, they're coming from Scotland. And is it the Slaughter Stone, I think? There's two stones that are flat. One of them, I think, could have come from Scotland. Some people suggested the Orkneys, but then I heard mainland Scotland. So I don't know where that's going to rest, where the jury will settle on geologists have to really get involved with the stone type. And there may be three places those stones came from, maybe from Scotland, maybe from Avebury area, the Marlborough Downs, and from the Preseli Mountains, possibly. it'll be interesting to see what they come up with. Our stones, though, however, came from the top of the hill. And starting in 1982, we started finding some of these big slabs because we have big roof slabs. The biggest one is almost 14 tons. It's 163 pounds per cubic foot. It's granite. We are the granite state. And the granite on a hill is kind of foliated. It does come up in layers like an onion if you know how to work it. And it has a lot of quartz in it, mica, feldspar, but there are veins of quartz and all of that. We even have quartz crystals that were found in a well up there, which is pretty cool. These crystals are, pretty impressive. But a woman named Mary Kramer, one of our guides, was having her picnic. She was taking a break. She was a guide, and she worked in the building too, a visitor center. She was taking a break, I guess, and she went out into the woods to sit on a stone. And as she's sitting there, she noticed the stone seemed to be an edge of a slab that was stuck up in the air, and she found it a nice, comfortable place to sit. But our staff, including her, had already been informed by one of our researchers, Dr. David Stewart Smith, to look for stones out in the woods that could have been a place where people were out there moving some of these slabs, actually quarrying them off the bedrock, maybe raising them up. And one thing to look at is the edge of them, because on the main site and in the first 15 acres where those astronomical alignments are, including the stones themselves, there's dimpling, little scalloping on the edges. If you look at an arrowhead, you will see the same thing, arrowhead or a stone knife or a spear point, by pressure flaking and by percussion flaking. And David said, look for that feature on the edge of some of these stones, because I've seen it on the site on some of the roof slabs, wall slabs, on some of the standing monoliths, and some of the flat slabs in the stone walls. And he goes, keep an eye on that. So she's sitting there. She notices the scalloping on the stone where she's sitting, just to her left. It's a pretty big slab. She also notices the whole edge she's sitting on is up in the air, which doesn't look natural. She looks under it, I guess, and she can see it's been propped up, as Dave theorized that could be. So she brought it to his attention, and he came up and looked at it, and he was pretty impressed by the whole thing. He goes, I think we found our first quarried slab that hasn't been moved to the main site or wherever its destination is, but they were preparing it. They had split it from the bedrock, they had raised it, and you can see all the little dimpling. So he contacted our state archaeologist, Dr. Gary Hume, and Gary Hume started in '76 as a part-time archaeologist for the state of New Hampshire. By 1980, he was full-time. So he brought him in. Actually, Gary, I take that back. Dr. Gary Hume had already done a couple projects at a site in '80 and '81. But he brought him back in '83, the next summer, after Mary found it 1 year later, and they did a whole excavation on that. And I think Dr. Gary Hume was the lead on that particular dig, and Dr. David Stewart Smith kind of worked under him on that. And what they found is hundreds of flakes of stone that had been knocked off this stone as they were dressing it or shaping it like an arrowhead, but on a big scale. And they found the propping stone under it. And as they cleared the bedrock below it, you could see that the two pieces would fit perfectly together at one time. So somebody actually worked a fissure crack. They raised it up, and the stone weighed about 3,000 to 4,000 pounds. I think they estimated, because of the diameter, shape, and depth of it, the 163 pounds. They estimated its weight. They had, I think it's like 3,000 something pounds. And over the years since then, we found 36 of these. And one of them is it's a monster. It's on the southwest corner, right up behind me. It's down the hill a ways, and it's a big slab with a big propping stone under it. We think that they were still building the main site on top of the hill, and these stones are going to be dragged up the hill and then put into the construction. And we found the last couple just a few years ago. We have it documented. We found it last, and there's probably more up there. When we had 36 of them, we started to think, wait a minute, these guys, when we found one, okay, they just left it, they didn't like it. And you find two or three, okay, they didn't like, they just, something about the rock they didn't like, they just left them there. When you find 36, you start to get a different feel that they were still building that site, and they walked away from the whole project. I know that there was a show on history by Megan Fox, the actress. She had her own series because she's into this ancient stuff. I didn't know that. In fact, she had my friend from Avery, Maria, on her show, as a matter of fact. And she talks from Priscilla Mountains. There's Megan up there, and she's showing some of the quarry sites there. It reminded me of what we had here. And what they call those stones there that didn't make it to, maybe their intention was Stonehenge. We don't know what their destination was, but they're still near the quarry site. They call them lazy stones because they're too lazy to go to where they were supposed to go, And that's what It's kind of a funny thing, but we have 36 of them today. And Dave Smith was such an interesting gentleman. He joined us in '78. When he was younger, he went to India. He got into music, bagpipes. He has a recording studio. He was into culture. After a few years in India, he went to England and Scotland, and he started working for today it's called English Heritage. I think it was called the Ancient Monuments Group. It was two groups that came together in the early '80s, became English Heritage, which takes care of Stonehenge and a lot of these megalithic sites. But he was doing masonry work, and he became a master mason under them. And eventually he got his doctorates in historical anthropology, and he got doctorates in theology. And throughout his life, he would travel back to Scotland. He had, and his family actually had family from over there too, so he'd go over there all the time. And he joined us in '78 after spending time overseas. And when he came back here, he was like, oh my God, he learned about these sites. He had no clue when he left that these ancient sites like we have at our site were across the landscape. And we came out, I was like, this is incredible, So he was with us for almost 40 years, and he did a lot of work on the way the stones were separated from the bedrock, propped. They were doing percussion flaking, dressing them, and then probably using log rollers, levers, and inclined banks to build these structures, And by 1989, he did a monograph, and it was called Ancient and Modern Quarry Techniques. He describes historic using metal tools, star drills, plug and feather to split stones, and mauls, metal mauls, and all of that. But he also talks about Stone Age technology, and that's what Dr. Gary Hume was also. He was a lithic specialist, so it was great to have not only a state archaeologist, but a guy that knew how to make stone tools, utensils, points, all of that stuff. He was a lithic, expert. And again, he goes, yeah, these big slabs are being dressed with Stone Age technology, almost as though they're like a 10.5 arrowhead. And we have that on our video that's in our theater, just a little quote from that, And so David spent almost 40 years with us, and he worked on other sites throughout the Northeast too. And by 2015, unfortunately, he had cancer. And for the next year, he went through all the treatments in Boston and everything. And he had a farm up in New Hampshire north of here too, which was kind of neat. But he would come down and visit us quite often, especially towards the end. He came down and saw us, and that's when we started finding the serpent wells, and we found a couple windows. And his head was spinning when he saw that, because he had been with us for, again, almost 40 years. And these things are revealing themselves to us. It's like, how come we didn't see this 10, 20, 30 years ago, these serpentine walls, these windows, And windows number 36 today. The quarried slabs, I think I spoke in error. I think we have 34 quarried slabs. We have 36 windows, and we have 16 serpent walls. But he just saw the first couple we found, both of the windows and the serpents. And it's kind of painful not to have him around anymore, because he had such a vast knowledge, It's just amazing the things that he could think about. And because my dad never saw this either, and a lot of researchers, from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, during that time, about 10, 15 years ago, a lot of them passed away, and it would be so neat that they could see like these things that we found just in the last several years. But it took us all this time to find them. On the summer solstice this year, my manager was looking at a wall that had a pentagonal window we found. It's a long story. He's looking below it. He's going to do a drumming circle. The summer solstice in the evening. He did music in school, but he's going for his graduate work in history and archaeology right now. He's been with us for 8 years. So he's looking at this wall where we found a 5-sided window, the remains of it, last year. And it was photographed in 1970 before somebody destroyed it. It was forgotten all these years. It's window number 35. He's looking at the bottom of it, just below it, near the ground level. And as he's looking at it, he sees these little cobbles in it. And he goes, oh my God, it's another window. And we found that's window number 7 that has little stone cobbles about this big that are sitting inside the window. And the problem is they block the light coming through, so you can go by it a million times. We did an archaeological dig right by there, looking for the 2 slabs that were once on top of the pentagonal window. And we had an idea where they were, because we ran ground penetration radar over it in April last year. In July, we decided to do the excavation. And we found the 2 windows right where the woman, her name is Doria, she's a geophysicist. She's been coming up here since 2020 from Massachusetts, bringing her ground penetration radar. She works all over New England, New York, She just did something out in Colorado. So it's, what a wonderful thing she did for us, over the last couple of years with her radar. But so there's a window on the summer solstice this year. That's the latest discovery. I guess that would be just about a month ago.
That's amazing. And one of the things I'm curious about is, as we're talking about like serpentine walls. For people who don't understand or may not be familiar with the terminology and are, thinking, is it because the wall is not a straight wall, or, why is it called serpentine? Could you give a brief explanation for that term?
Yeah. So serpentine wall basically is a wall shaped like a snake. And interesting enough, some of them actually are linear straight. We have a couple of those. And they're elsewhere in the Northeast too. I don't know if it was before the show I mentioned North Stonington, Connecticut. And they have over 400 of them in that one town. And they run from about 27 feet up to about 300 feet. I think the average is 90 feet. And a lot of them are actually linear. So they don't, uh, most of them in North Stonington are fairly straight. Some have heads like this or tails, if I'm doing this on the camera. So they're linear, rectilinear. Sometimes they curve. And as the author of the book about North Stonington, Mark Starr, said, as you go into Rhode Island, they seem to be more curved, the walls. We have everything at our site. The first one I found was a linear, straight, 27-foot wall that seemed to have a head, which is a kind of a rectangular shaped rock, probably about 3 feet by about a foot tall, maybe a foot wide or so. And it looked like it was actually one time horizontal, set up high in the wall at the very end of it, on the south end of the wall. But it looked like it slipped. And below, on the stone itself, is actually a big cutout, like a V shape. And just below that, where it slipped, it kind of slipped off of it, there's another stone with an arrow shape. I think they actually fit together, and it held the stone in place. But over time, trees, weather, people, whatever, the stone act or earthquakes, we have them up here, the stone tipped down. I said, am I looking at the head of a serpent? And I had been riding we got 3 different ATVs. I was riding my old 3-wheeler, which I still have, 1984. I was riding it on one of our snowshoe trails out towards where my dad used to live. He used to live on the north side. And I happened to see this wall many times going through his house. This is just one way to go to his house, but I went by there quite often. And I'd see the wall, never paid much attention to it. This day, the sunlight was coming through the trees. It was illuminating it. And it just looked so strange to me that I stopped the ATV. I walked 60, 65 feet over to it. I realized when I got there that it was actually a steep drop off. It was on a ridge of bedrock that dropped off to the west side, I guess, and I'm on the east side of it looking at it. And I'm looking at the stone wall, and it seemed to have a very gradual, almost subtle taper. The wall started high with that stone head that kind of slipped down, but right behind, I guess, the neck, if you will, it kind of high, and it kind of went down and down and down over the 27 feet. And at the end of it is a big, flat, rectangular stone with rounded corners. I'd say the stone was about 3 feet long. I'm like, is that a head? Is that a body? And is that a tail? I kept thinking like rattletail. I don't know. Rattlesnake came up. I don't know why, because it really doesn't look like a rattlesnake, I don't think. But anyway, I'm looking at it, and I went on to the other side and had to go down. It's a steep drop off over that bedrock. It's like a ridge. And I went down, and I looked up at it. I said, oh my God, this thing doesn't go anywhere. Farmers' walls generally, they usually enclose fairly big areas, and the walls are fairly linear, and they're made out of a lot of rounded stones left by the glaciers, the field stones of various sizes. And they started building farmers' walls in the 1750s to 1850s. It's kind of the classic time, But even up in Pompton, Maine, George Pompton actually in 1607, same year as Jamestown, actually had a settlement that failed because it was so cold. They were only up there into the winter, and I think they got the heck out of there. It was kind of a harsh time period. We had the little ice age going on. They built a stone wall there, apparently, the first one that we know of since after Columbus. But after that, they started using a lot of wood. These wooden stock. You go to Plymouth Plantation, it's wood. The palisade. A lot of wooden fences of different designs. But by the 1750s, a lot of land clearing for agriculture here. And these stones, with the trees gone and everything, these stones would start really coming out of the ground. Every year we have frost, in the winter, and these stones would pop up. Farmers get sick of them. They started either making piles, or they got even a little bit more efficient. They started building walls to separate land, their own land or between them and a neighbor. So there were boundaries, field clearings, and stock fences, to help keep the animals in or out of an area. And they built about 240,000 miles of these. This wall looked nothing like that. It had some rounded rocks, but there's flat slabs in it, and a kind of rectangular stone, I think, was a head. I said, I think it got a snake here. It looks like a serpent, but I've never seen a serpent wall. I've never heard of a serpent wall. I knew about Serpent Mound. I don't know if you're familiar, Mike, with the one in Ohio. The Great
Yes.
Serpent was pretty famous, yeah. I knew about that going back into the 80s, and we finally visited that 3 years ago after all these years. I used to fly into Columbus all the time with the airline. All the cities with American. I was a pilot captain with them. But I finally got to it, and I'm like, this Serpent Mound's amazing. And they say there's 94 of them all the way out to Iowa. So there's other effigy mounds. Stone walls, never heard of a snow. So I found that one, and then I kept my eyes open after that. I said, I don't know if I really have a serpent or not. I can't be sure. I can't talk to the builders. And I really don't want to stick my neck out and say, oh, it's a serpent mound like that, because I really don't know. We try to be careful at our site to go out and just say, oh, it's positively this or that. If you have others and it's a pattern, then you can start to be a little more confident that this is something intentional. So during the course of that spring going into summer, we started finding a couple more, and one of them is a big sweeping, about 137 feet in length, a big sweeping serpent with a triangular head. It's a boulder shaped like kind of a triangular shape, a tail, which is kind of a rounded boulder, and it's all sitting on bedrock, like everything up there is sitting on bedrock, and there's like a thin layer of soil next to them, but in this case, you can actually see the bedrock right by the head. I'm like, I think I got a great big S-shaped serpent here. And then I found another one too, another couple that I thought looked like serpent walls too. And then Scott Walters came along with a bunch of people, including Alan Butler from England and his wife. It was about 10 people, book author David Brody and other people were in this whole kind of big entourage. Might have been a dozen people there. And I said, I think I found a serpent wall this spring, and I think I have a couple more. And I let them look at them, and they're like, yeah, because Scott had already done a thing on the Serpent Mound in Ohio. He already did a stone wall in Scotland that was a stone wall serpent. And one other one he did somewhere too, I think. And he goes, and they all said, I think you're onto something. We can't be totally sure, but you got like 3 or 4 serpent-shaped walls, So a serpent wall can be in various, shapes, It doesn't have to be all squiggly. It can be straight. But we went to a meeting in 2017 down in Connecticut near a site called Gunjiwap. It's a 250-acre site that has a lot of structures very similar to our site. It's near the Navy base. It's right next door. And the Navy actually has been good over the years. They told the Navy personnel and their families, please don't go over there and ruin those stone structures, and I think they've been very good about that. And more recently, the state took over the property, at least part of it, from the YMCA that had it. And I think they're trying to preserve it. And there, they have found some serpent walls too. And I've been to that site many times, and I never saw the serpent walls there. So we went to a Holiday Inn, which was right there. I think it was in 2017. And they're going to be some 3-day meeting. We went only for the Saturday meeting. We didn't go for Friday. We didn't stay overnight. There's a Friday through Sunday meetings and everything, field trips and all that. We just wanted to hear a couple speakers, and we had to get back to run our business. So my wife and I went down there for a day trip. We saw a couple of speakers, and outside the auditorium, there's a book table with different authors, and I pick up one of them, and it's all about it's called ceremonial stonework. And I'm looking at it, and I knew I saw the authors now. Oh yeah, he's going to speak. That's one of the speakers I wanted to hear. I'm looking at the back cover, 270 photographs, 8,000 structures. I'm like, 8,000 structures, and then 50 categories, 25 categories of structures. I'm like, wow. I said, that must be the whole Northeast with 8,000 structures. So I get into the book, I start looking at it, and what do I see? One of the first things that came up is a section on the serpent walls, and that's the first time anywhere other than our site that I saw anything about a wall that looks like a snake, a head, body, and tail. And in it, he shows picture after picture. He doesn't show, because there's 400 of them in that town, from 27 feet up to about 300. I think I already went 90 feet was the average. I was shocked. I'm like, my wife and I are looking at they got them there too. So we're not imagining that. He sees them too, as well as other researchers, And so after he did his talk for 1 hour, it was wonderful. And he talks about all sorts of the 25 different categories, including windows, which that was the other thing too. We had just found a couple at our site in the stone walls, these beautiful lintel holes in the walls, as we were talking about. A woman spoke from Colorado. I think her name is Elizabeth. She did it by Skype, and I wanted to meet her in person, but they didn't fly out and all of that. So she did her 1 hour talk, and it looked like Mark Starr's PowerPoint presentation 1 hour before, except it's flat land, and North Stonington is not. It's very open land too. It's like east of Denver, below Nebraska. She mentions the counties. She's showing cairns, chambered cairns. The D, like the letter D, is in delta-shaped walls. We have one at our site. The first time I noticed it is when I built the diorama, which is still on. When you enter our visitor center, the diorama is there that I built when I was in college. We've updated it. It has a D-shaped wall there. Mark Starr, that's one of his categories, is the D-shaped. And these can cover thousands of square feet, you know, as various sized D-shaped ones. She shows that. Then she starts showing her serpentine walls. And it's kind of ranch land where she's talking. It's like big open ranch land with mostly earth because we've driven through that area. There's some stone there, but I didn't realize they had, not like New England, there's rocks everywhere here. It's mostly dirt, I thought. And she's showing the same features. She didn't have chambers per se, except the little chambers inside the cairns, you know, those piles of rocks like little chambers. That's probably the closest to a chamber she had. Well, after that, we found out that the serpentine walls zigzag and also chevron-shaped walls, which we have, and they have them in North Stonington too, and other places in Connecticut we found out later. They're out in Mount Shasta, a town called Weed, California. And I got 110 pictures from that area, and it's got the same kind of, they don't have chambers that I know, but they have the serpentine walls and the other shaped walls. And nobody knows, I guess, who built them out there. But after we found her in Winnipeg, they're down in Alabama, and Jacksonville State University's Dr. Harry Holstein, I've corresponded with him during COVID. He invited us down, but we didn't go during COVID. And he's got a 40 square mile area. He's got cairns, standing stones, and he's got serpentine walls he's been working on since 1977, I think it was. He didn't know about the Northeast or us, and we didn't know about him, but he does now. His serpent walls seem to be on a little bit smaller, like a little smaller scale size, you know. And the ones up here, I mean, they can range from like our 27-footer. And the biggest one we have is 2,550 feet, we believe. It goes around the entire astronomical, where all the alignment monoliths and stones are, comes back right in front of its face, and it looks like it could be biting its tail, which could be the symbol of the Ouroboros. We have 3 possible Ouroboruses besides that on our site too. Most of them look like the tail's in the mouth almost. That's what it appears to be. But this one here, it's on the side. And if you Google Ouroboros, you can see a few of them look like that too. The head with a tail like that. Right. And we've been walking by that one, the watch house, since we opened in 1958. Actually, we revisited 1955. Mr. Goodwin actually was paying attention to it in the 1930s. Nobody ever saw the pointed tail or the boulder glacial head. And then the wall after it was built with undulations, humps, and it goes around. And then like the equinox, like after 1,200 feet or whatever is the equinox sunset, it's a hump in the wall. And it's also part of 4 collinear alignment stones. The hump, there's a standing stone that's fallen today. It's in the S-shaped serpent, not to confuse everybody, but the S-shape is right here. This wall's out here. And this right here is the end of a wall, and then a glacial boulder, and then the astronomical platform. So you're looking across 4 points from this point here, and you're looking across 2 serpent bodies, if you will, for the equinox sunset. And that's something that's pretty mind-blowing in itself, I think, you know. But it comes back again right in front of its head. It does one more beautiful hump, and then it goes 90 degrees to a very pointed tail. I don't know if I sent you some of the LiDAR images of that. I may have, you know, back a couple months ago, perhaps.
You might have, and I'm curious, as you know, we're describing the serpentine wall. I started getting pictures of when I was in Mexico, you know, memory of the pyramid there, that during, I believe it's the solstice and the equinox, that the sun creates a shadow that looks like a serpent running down the wall. And I'm wondering, does that also occur on your site, or is that a totally different feature?
Yeah. Well, that's an excellent point in question too, because that 2,550 foot serpent, the head, is actually a boulder and on the side of it is a chamber called the Watch House Chamber. And inside the Watch House Chamber it's a small chamber. You can crawl into it, and there's a rock on the back wall. Now it's all made out of gray granite, kind of, except in the very back wall, there's a stone back there that we've been looking at for decades, kind of wondering what it was. And it's a quartzite, so it's a very white quartzite stone in the back wall. Well, it's been talked about even in 1992. I don't know if you're familiar with Hans Holzer on the Discovery Channel's Travel Channel in 2020 through 2022. They ran the Holzer Files. David
Right.
Schrader was the host. Yeah,
Yeah.
and we were on the second season. And David, I had been on his regular show out of Minneapolis a few times before, but he became the host of that show. And he came out with a whole team from California. He's from Minneapolis. And Scott Walters actually joined them midweek, because Scott's show had moved from History Channel to Discovery Network's Travel Channel. And I think Scott's on Gaia TV now. But they wanted him in there to bring his audience into the Holzer Files. And because Holzer came to our place starting in 1970, Hans Holzer, originally from Austria, he lived in New York City, and he became kind of the father of the paranormal. At least that's what I've been told. That's what they referred to him. He became a friend of the families. He died in '09, the same year my dad died. But in 1992, he wrote Long Before Columbus. And Barbara Hand Cloud did the forward. And she was pretty well known in the circles, paranormal, and she visited our site, as a matter of fact. She did the forward. In the 1992 book, she's talking about that same stone, wondering what that stone, it really grabbed her attention. She devoted a whole couple paragraphs to it, wondering what it was. In 1996, we had the first souvenir book written by Joanne Lambert, Spanish high school teacher. She worked for us in the summers and did a wonderful job on this book. And she was talking about that same stone. It seemed to grab a lot of people's attention. I don't know if my book right here, it's going to show up very well, but there's actually a sequence of 3 pictures. I know it's a little hard to see. But so in 2018, we decided to look into having our entire property do a forest management program, and we hired a licensed forester in 2018. He went to the University of New Hampshire, and we interviewed a few people, really liked him. And we wanted to thin out the entire forest, make it healthy, any invasive species get rid of, make it good for wildlife, but protect all the chambers and all the walls by removing big stones that were in danger of falling on the walls or uprooting the structures of walls. So they spent 2 winters doing that whole thing, and it was actually beneficial for the forest. And also it provided some revenue for us because it's like harvesting a product. And boy, do we have the wildlife up there, and the forest is so much healthier. But we were able to see for the very first time in 2020, the sunlight actually entered the chamber, because before that, the trees prevented it, even in the winter. Even with the leaves off the trees, you could not see the light go into that chamber the whole time I was growing up. But in the ancient past, we think the hill was fairly bare. So the sunlight went in there on the equinox. And you mentioned equinox, you mentioned Chichen Itza, I think El Callisto, the pyramid with the 91 steps.
Yes.
The Kukulkan going down the staircase in the evening towards sunset on the equinox. So on the equinox of 2020, we were there in the morning watching, and what we saw was we were told the year before that by a friend. She was a friend of Scott Walters. She had Sunseeker. She's from Texas too. She's the one from Bullard, but actually she was born, I think, in San Antonio. She's doing tours right now, England, and she was just in Ireland, and she's going to be doing something in Egypt. But she was doing stuff with Scott Walters for a while too. But anyway, she predicted on her phone in the spring of 2019. Once we knew we were going to do the forestry thing. She goes, once you clear that out, I think you're going to see the sunlight come in and hit the stone on the equinox in the morning, maybe around 9 o'clock-ish, using that app on her phone. Well, that's pretty cool. Well, a year later, we had already done that part of the forestry thing. They removed the trees, and the sunlight struck that stone. Not only struck it, but actually the bottom of the stone was framed by the shape of the entrance. It was actually framed the bottom of the stone perfectly with the shadow and light. And that was 8 o'clock in the morning. By 8:30, by watching it, we saw that morphed into, it looked like a hand with an index finger pointing back at that stone. We thought, well, this is really exciting. However, 3 years later, I'm up there with a lady, and we had watched, with a whole group of people, watched the sunrise over a fallen monolith, one of the big monoliths that has actually fallen. About half of them are fallen today, like Stonehenge. Some of the stones fall down over time. And that was earlier in the morning, 6:30-ish, something like that. I forget the exact time. And then there's another monolith near the Oracle Chamber that has also it has a notch on the top of it. The sun rises over there for summer, winter, and spring and fall equinox. And we watched that. And then the next one would be go down to the watch house and watch the illumination inside of it. But a lot of the people had taken off for breakfast, you know. So just her and I. It was kind of chilly. I said, "Do you want to go down and warm up? We got 30 minutes. 8 o'clock, we should see this on the stone." And I had my back to the chamber, and she's in front of me. And I said, "Yeah. So if we look in here," and as I turned and looked in there at 7:30 in the morning, I'd never watched it at 7:30. I look in there, and what happened is actually it would be at the top of the stone at 8 o'clock like this. I'm sorry, but what I saw was the bottom of the stone was perfectly framed with the shadow and light. And I'm like, oh my God. So I took my camera and we got those pictures in my book of it actually doing that. 30 minutes later, it does that. Because of the shape of the entrance, and you can say it's all coincidental. I can't believe that's a coincidence. And then at 8:30, for very momentarily, you got to catch it. It turns into like the shape of a hand, and here's a stone actually pointing. What we think, and we can't talk to the builders, is this chamber represents the womb. It's like the male, the son, the fertilization, the eggs being fertilized. And I've been to Newgrange in Ireland. That's a winter solstice event there with a 65-foot chamber inside the 300-foot, looks like a big UFO flying saucer. And we were over there in '83. And you can go in there on a lottery, I guess, so you can go watch the winter solstice. Down the street is Knelth and Delft. And I think Knelth is a very similar structure. It's huge. And that's the equinox. But back to, you mentioned serpent and equinox. Our site has a boulder, which is the head of that serpent, and here we are in equinox with this illumination. There is 2 caves in Colorado called the Pathfinder Cave and the Crack Cave, and they're not well known, but they're natural caves, but they've been modified and have petroglyphs in the back. Both of them have in the back wall is a serpent carved into the wall with some other glyphs around it. You know, on this same morning, the sunlight will go into those chambers, and it actually takes that serpent, and half of the serpent is illuminated and half of it's in a shadow. You go out to Chaco Canyon, you have the sun diagram, one I think for summer, 2 for winter, with the 9 spirals, which is half the
Wow.
lunar cycle. Some people suggest that 9 represents half the 18 and a half year lunar cycle. I really don't know. But we've been to Chaco Canyon. You can't go up in the butte to see it. It's off limits without special permission, I guess. But on the equinox, it's a serpent carving, and I got pictures of that where the serpent is split in half, like back in Colorado. And if you go out to California, the Mojave North Cave has the same thing. It's like a repeating pattern. And then we head south back to Chichen Itza, to that El Callisto, the castle pyramid. And Kukulkan comes down those 91 steps, 1/4 of a year, I guess is 91, goes down that over the course. So there's a serpent, there's an equinox, and there's a serpent with our site going around with its chamber right there and the illumination on the equinox. So you brought up an incredibly good point. And I point that out to different people at different time periods, but a similar thing. So you wonder if there's something about equinox and serpent that goes back into the prehistory so far back that it kind of spread out to other people. Or just people did the same thing independently. I don't know why they would associate serpent. There's probably a reason I'm missing. I'm sure somebody out there knows and said, you know why serpent is related to equinox? It's this, but I haven't heard that in all the years we've been here. But I think that's pretty cool. We should do maybe like a kind of, what do they call it? A space, what do they call it? Facebook, where you can actually video these around, they're different time zones, but that day show us and then show the other ones doing your illumination thing like we have here,
Yeah.
space time or whatever, the FaceTime, I think they call it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that would be cool. And along with Chicken Itza, I there is a spot where on the corner when I was there, I actually did it, and there is an echo, like vibration sound that happens only in that corner. And so I'm curious, since you're pointing out the similarities of the serpentine and the equinox, are there certain rooms that generate sound that is only created in certain angles, or oddity with sounds is there?
Well, the Oracle Chamber is the biggest structure still on the site. It's right next to the sacrificial table. It's on the east side of the sacrificial table. It's approximately almost 28 feet in length. It runs true north and south. And it has a wing that runs to the east about 18 or 19 feet. We actually got the measurements of that. And it's been told by my son's music teacher. My son's 37 now, but he was in music in his teens. His music teacher and they had kind of like a band and everything. They did come up to the site a number of times. His music teacher actually performed on one of our solstices too, you know. But when he got into the oracle chamber, he told my wife and some of the students, they did some sound checks in there. I don't know, you know, by speaking, you know, and talking. He goes, this place is really acoustically designed. It has a special acoustic effect to it or whatever. You know, he got into that whole thing. I thought that was interesting. But Scott Walters, when he did the show, he filmed us in 2012 for the 2013 airing on America on Earth. He talked about acoustical archaeology, and he kind of got into that with that oracle chamber too. So I don't have a really clear answer for you, but people have talked about that. But that chamber does have a 6-foot tube, horizontal, all made out of stone, that runs from the inside of the chamber with a step below it. The step is part of the original bedrock, and they actually quarried around it to make the floor deeper and use that material for building the walls of the chamber, perhaps. They did that in another chamber called the Chamber of Ruins. They actually lowered the floor by taking the material out and using it for wall building. Now you have a lower floor, and they left part of it on that chamber. When you build homes in New England, I think in Texas there's a lot of slab work with homes, you know, not cellars. But from my experience, and when I went down there, my instructors say, we live on cement slabs down here. We don't have cellars. And I've read a reason for that. Up in New England, we all have cellars pretty much, you know. But when they put the foundations in up here, they put in a footing. It's a big, wide concrete footing, and then the foundation sits onto that once that's cured, you know, after a few days or whatever. Well, they did that kind of thing where they actually removed the bedrock and left the bedrock kind of raised where it originally was, and the wall sits on top of that. In the oracle chamber, they removed the rock and they lowered the floor by doing that, the bedrock, and the floor goes down as you remove, you know, sections of rock and use it in the walls or the roof slabs or whatever. They left a piece there right below the speaking tube. So anywhere, I'm around 5'7" and a half, 5'8". Anyone around my height, a little bit shorter, can stand on that stone, and a little bit taller too, and you can speak right into that tube, and the voice goes 6 feet. It's horizontal, and it comes out underneath the sacrificial table. And when you're standing outside above on a stone ramp looking down at the table, it gives you a good view of the table. Maybe a ceremonial was taking place on the table. You'd hear his voice coming out underneath the table. And we had one guy who had a really deep but a very loud, very powerful voice, and he could preach to that thing. He could sing in there and everything, and it sounded terrific when he did it. Some vandalism in 2019 caused some damage to the tube where it comes out underneath the table. It made the papers and everything. And what we did discover during the repair of that is that part where it comes out under the table seems to be flared like a trumpet or a clarinet or any musical instrument. It kind of flares out a little bit. And we think that helped with the acoustics. So when they spoke, it helped to amplify it, perhaps. I know we get sound experts. They could describe it to you, you know. But that tube actually back in 1936 was not visible. They had 2 plugs of stone blocking it, whoever these people were. And there's 2 underground drains in that chamber. And there's drains in other parts of the site too. A whole network of underground drains. And when Malcolm Pearson got there with Goodwin in 36, and then in 37 started doing some cleaning and excavating and repair work, the drains in the oracle chamber had 2 plugs of stone blocking them. And the oracle tube was not visible. It had 2 plugs of stone. And in 37, a young boy named Paul was in there. He was one of the helpers. And he happened to notice this kind of square-shaped stone sitting in this, you know, above his head. And it looked a little curious because usually when you put stones like bricks, it's 1 over 2 over 1. This was kind of like a square-shaped seam. So he decided to go back. He had like a wooden shack for sleeping overnight that Mr. Goodwin built for his workers so they could spend the night there if they wanted to, you know. And he went in there, got a kitchen knife, came back out, and he was getting in there, and he actually popped this stone out. I wish we had it today because I don't know where it went after 1937, but when he pulled it out, he saw what looked like a gigantic hole, and everybody said, "Oh, maybe it's a closet," but it goes six. I don't know how you ever reach the other side, because it goes 6 feet in, and it's only about maybe a foot and a half wide by high, and it goes again 6 feet. The next year, they were digging under the table, and they thought the table was sitting on earth, not on any kind of supports. And as they dug down, they found 4 stone legs that it sat on. That was a surprise. That was like, wow, this much dirt built up over about 30, almost 30 inches of dirt had built up next to the table, right to the bottom of it over the years, concealing the legs. And so it's actually sitting on 4 legs. One of the legs was in disrepair, so they had to kind of fix it. And what they noticed was that wall underneath the table, by what would be the oracle chamber behind it. They also noticed that kind of that same pattern, not 1/2, but kind of a seam. So one of them pulled the stone out of there, loosened it just for kicks, and pulled it out, and the thing just slid right out of there. So our thought is that was that oracle tube for like a priestess, speaking through that, giving prophecy, perhaps, talking, giving them commands. We don't know. I've been to Malta, and in Malta, I asked one of the guys, I said, "What are these holes in these walls here?" Several different places. And he goes, "Those are for an oracle to speak through." And people would be in and they'd hear the voice coming to them, giving them commands, prophecy. I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And that's our best guess. They weren't there, 5,500 years ago when they built it. But I said, we have something similar to that in our site in New Hampshire, and they were quite interested in that. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. Somebody was hiding behind the curtain, speaking during a ceremony, maybe on the summer solstice, equinox. Maybe somebody got married or somebody died, and they'd be there for that event. And a priest could have stayed in that chamber because there's an 8-foot stone bed that actually goes into a hole in the wall, 8 feet. And it has a window in there too. So if you're laying in there, you can see the entire chamber, And that chamber, the way they designed it, you can't really tell it's a chamber behind the table, because if you're standing looking east to your north, there's actually what they call a sheep back. It's bedrock that's actually a hump, and they blended the roof of the chamber into that hump. And when you look across, it looks like it's just a natural hump that starts over at a bedrock hump, And you couldn't see the entrance, you couldn't see the exit, and the whole thing was concealed. And people weren't there except perhaps on special days for this whatever ceremony was taking place. So it's speculation on our part. We try to look at the whole thing, like what function with this horizontal 6-foot tube? It's not a chimney. It's it goes this way. It had 2 plugs of stone, and the drains were plugged up. It almost looks like somebody had closed the place up. They went away with intent to come back at some point to use the place, and they never did. So maybe they used it for years and decades or centuries, but at some point something happened. They didn't continue building it with those slabs that are all over the hill, but they seem to like winterize it. Up north, we had a camp we sold 5 years ago up at Lake Winnipesaukee, and in the wintertime, before winter, we had to go up there and we had to winterize everything, all the plumbing, everything, close it all down. And then in spring, we had to unwinterize everything. It seemed to have that feel to it. They blocked everything up and everything. And they certainly wouldn't want people walking around there checking on this and finding the speaking tube, especially if that had some power over the people, Yeah, again, back to the Wizard of Oz thing. Don't pay attention to the guy behind the curtain there, So.
Right. And that brings up a really interesting question as we're talking about this site and the discoveries being made and being, pieces of it exposed that maybe weren't exposed before. How do you preserve it in such a way that using modern methods doesn't disturb or, lessen the ancient effect that it has? Like, example is, that tube, if when it was vandalized, how did you get it to keep the effect and not ruin the effect because modern tech versus ancient tech?
You're right. Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of difficult. We try to, because we have photographs of the site too, but the oracle tube was kind of crushed by the vandalism, by the table. But we know what it looked like before, number one, and photographs of it. We try to put it back, and part of it wasn't damaged, so we try to use that to guide us through repositioning some of the stones. And it was actually a stone that was about halfway down, maybe 3 feet into it, that was starting to come loose just from time, nothing from vandalism that we know of. And we got that back out, back where it belonged. Because slowly things happen, no matter what site you look at in the world, whether it's a Sphinx or whatever, they all need tender loving care at some point. You try not to, and I know we go to the national parks, or the like Mesa Verde and stuff, the archaeological ones, and they say basically they're not doing a lot of excavation. I mean, they still do. They do some of that. They do a lot of ground penetration radar because it's non-intrusive. It doesn't disturb anything. And then if they see something interesting, they will put in an excavation there. But they don't try to dig everything up like in the old days. You go back 100 years ago, 150 years ago, people went through these sites just looking for artifacts. Just digging, digging, digging. Some of the mounds in Ohio, like the Site Mound, which is, we saw that too, it's below Serpent Mound. And I asked you, it was actually archaeologists working there that day. They're trying to find some habitat site next to it. And there was another a guide there, a national park guide, or state guide, I think it's a state park. I said, how much of that mound, that when it was in the foreground, how much of that is rich? Because it's been rebuilt. It's like, oh my God, what happened to it? And then she explained between archaeological work and also agriculture. What you see today is not quite what it looked like, before they restored it, So it's like, oh. So we do some archaeology at our site. We use ground penetration radar, and we will do some digging this year. But we try not to, we try to do as little invasive stuff as possible, because what we dig today, 100 years from now, they'll have better technology to analyze it. And if Goodwin had done that back in the 30s, we would have done the same thing probably Goodwin did. We were just dug, But today, what we know today, if we told Goodwin, like, when you dig in the chambers, please just dig a little bit, but leave the soil for future archaeologists. What you see here, don't take it all. And they'll leave like a bulk. So they might leave an area untouched for future with much better technology. More information can be gathered, and that's the way they do it. So there are, we try not to rebuild things. Goodwin did some reconstruction. We do repairs. We do preventative maintenance. And if something looks a little unstable, we try to secure it. We don't want it falling down. We don't want it falling down, number one. We certainly don't want it falling down on one of our guests, or an animal or whatever is up there. But so that's a great question. We just try to be very, very cautious about the research we do. We try to talk it over. We talk about with our archaeologist. Our archaeologist was with us for 30 years. She worked with David Stewart Smith. She was mainstream. She was president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society, and she just retired about 3 years ago. She's 95, and she lives in Florida. And her husband was a doctor of geology at Tufts University. She traveled the world with him, and she knows all the archaeologists all over New Hampshire and the Northeast pretty much. And she was kind of mainstream when she came in '89 to our site. And once she saw it, she never left us. She's the outsider, like, oh, this site shouldn't really be here. And once she got into it and saw all the facts, data, and evidence, and then she did shovel test pit study across the hilltop, looking for soil depth, looking for artifacts. And her husband was very useful for about 6 years. And then he actually, on the highway, Route 93 that comes out of Boston, he was actually killed by a driver. Unfortunately, it was an unfortunate thing. And he had just retired from Tufts. But he was very useful. And what did the area look like 4,000 years ago? How much soil was on the hills? What did the rivers look like? All of that data. And he was really into it. And he helped out the New Hampshire Archaeological Society a lot with his geological data and knowledge. And he published and everything. And again, they traveled to Egypt. They traveled all over the place. And then she came to us in '89 and, began working on the site. And we still talk to her today. She's living near her daughter in Florida. And it's so sad. And she's on the front cover of my book. There she is doing a dig about 10 years ago, right near the chamber in ruins. You can see her with a sifter looking down with her hat on. So she worked with David Stewart Smith, and she worked with our other researchers, And she was very meticulous, very careful, and only dug where she thought she should. And sometimes we had radar. We ran radar just to say, is this a good spot? Not going across just digging.
Yeah, so my next question for you is kind of a odd type question, because we've been talking about this being like a megalithic site, and people all over the country are like, oh, megalithic, okay, this, and this. But how did you determine, when you and your dad and everybody was looking at this going, this is a megalithic structure versus something natural that was made.
I mean, I think they always knew. There's no doubt that the whole thing is a man-made, site up there. It's not natural. They use natural glacial boulders for part of their, like the watch house, with the serpent head and all of that. But I mean, they always knew it was man-made. And then the question was, who did it? Some of the skeptics thought that the Patty family must have built the whole thing, and that he was an eccentric farmer with his 6 husky sons. Why would anybody the site shouldn't be ancient. So if it's not ancient and it's man-made, somebody had to build it. So they got to blame it on somebody. And mainstream sometimes still say, oh, that farmer Patty, he was actually a 5th-generation shoemaker. His tax records show he had some domesticated animals. And his grandson had a shoe shop down the street where there's a house, a split-level house sitting today. And the Pattys came from England to Virginia. We have the whole story of them coming up to Salem, Massachusetts, into Haverhill, Massachusetts, which this was part of Haverhill, Mass, until 1741. But he didn't have 6 husky sons. He had 2 sons, and one, Jonathan, the oldest, died in Boston, 17 years old, 3 days short of his 18th birthday. They always try to blame it on his sons. They had nothing better to do than go up and build thousands of feet of walls, build all these chambers, and not realizing that there's 800 other locations throughout the Northeast for the same type of stonework, because we've heard in the past, well, if this is an ancient culture of stone builders, where's the other sites? I'm like, you don't know there's other sites, right down in Windham, New Hampshire, Plastow, Danville, and Groton, Connecticut, on and on and on, and they have no clue. And these are some of the experts, it's like, first off, he's not a farmer. He probably did some farming. Like I was an airline and I had a little garden. Doesn't mean I'm a gardener. Maybe you could say I do some gardening, but he was a shoemaker, a cordwainer. And he was a 5th generation. He had 9 daughters with names, and there's 2 daughters that had no names. We wonder if they may have died when they were born, stillborn. But the other son, Seth, he's the only son that survived into adulthood, and he had a son named George who actually inherited the site. Then he sold it to a guy named Nathaniel H. Paul, a lumberman, used it for a woodlot for 28 years. And it goes back to Ebenezer Dustin, who was a Patty family relative. And then it goes to another Patty, I forget her name, Anna Patty, I always get an Anna McNeil Patty, I think her name was. And then it goes to a Fred Dustin, and Fred Dustin's the guy that sold it to William Goodwin, the first researcher. So there's almost 200 years of Patties up there. But, it doesn't look like a farm. I lived on a farm in Vermont for the first airline I worked for, up in North Clarendon, Vermont, by Rutland, Vermont Airport. I lived in that farm, and I used to ride all around there on my bikes when I was not flying. And even when I was flying, I flew in Twin Otters passengers, but I also did teaching. And I'd fly over these farms. Like, that does not look anything like this place up here. There's no resemblance at all, And I lived at a farm in a summer house there, right by the airport, like I mentioned. So they want to say this is either that or Patty was a shoemaker, so it's a shoe shop. And again, my grandparents, 3 of them worked in shoe shops. My other one worked in the wood shop. It don't look like that either. So I don't know where they come up with this stuff, but it's their easy answer, the mainstream. We heard that more in the past, and today, I think it's still there, maybe on social media somewhat. I even heard from somebody say that my dad built the whole place in 1962. It's a well-known fact. I'm like, we opened it in 1958, and it was written about, and Boston Globe wrote about it. The Haverhill Gazette wrote about it in 1934. We have pictures from the Haverhill Gazette, and it was Reverend Ward. It's a very famous name is the Ward family in this whole area. It's a very, very old name. There's Reverend Ward standing there in the site, looking at it 2 years before Goodwin ever visited the site. And then there's 4 pictures from 1920 of a young man standing in front of the East-West Chamber. And then we have a picture in Goodwin's book. He wrote 4 books. And the last one is in 1946 while he was very sick. He died in 1950. But the 4th book has our site, Raymond, Upton Chamber, and other sites throughout. He had 16 sites he knew by 1946. And there's pictures going back to 1900 of our site. So my dad couldn't have built it. And then we go to Dean Stowe. He's pretty famous. You see his name in National Geographic years ago in the Smithsonian, from SUNY, State University in New York. Very famous guy. 1989, the year my son was born, New York Times did a syndicated thing with other papers too. a question was asked, what is America's Stonehenge? He decided to answer it, or maybe one of his underlings. Oh, it was built in 1927 by the family and opened up to the public. My dad was born in 1929. He opened it up in 1958. And here's a professional saying that my dad, I guess, built it and opened it up in 1927, 2 years before he was born. And they made all the papers. I'm like, where does this stuff come from, you know? It's
Yeah.
very frustrating because if you're being professional, at least you could have your facts on all your ducks in a row instead of making up stuff. And that's purely made up, you know? He did no fact checking whatsoever. And then people reading that see he's got a doctorate, says, oh, okay, that guy built it in 27, you know? My dad was 2 years before being born back then. And you never heard of it until 1955, you know? So that, after a while, it gets a little bit old, you know? And I'm 72 now, so I mean, I may not have that many years, but it's like, are you kidding me? You know, if I flew my planes like that, I wouldn't be here today, you know, with that kind of shoddy work, you know? I mean, seriously, you know?
No, yeah, you're
So
right. And
I flew for 30,000 hours, you know. I know. Anyway, it just the standards are not. I don't know. They they get dogmatic, you know. They have all the answers and they have a title, and when they speak, the world's supposed to listen to that. It's like my dad wasn't even around then, and there's others like that. There's a bunch of others like that too. You see, it's like
right.
what? Where does that come from? You know, and these are supposed to be professionals, you know. So you know, so anyway, I try not to get too upset about it because it's just like we know we look at the facts, data, and evidence, and that's what we try to present. You know.
Right. I agree. And there is no point sometimes in arguing with them because,
Mhm.
yeah. But
Yeah, yeah.
one thing I want to address, if we can, I know we're getting close to the hour and a half mark. If you don't mind, answering this question, or if you feel it'll be too
Sure,
long, we can postpone it for another episode. But my question
sure.
is, in transparency for everyone watching this, we were talking about before we went live, you were finding like trapezoidal shape in some of the chambers and different shapes to the chambers. And so I feel like, is there, what purpose do you feel like that brings to the chamber? Does it affect the sound or the light or anything? Because it doesn't seem like something you would randomly do. Go, oh hey, let's put a trapezoid floor here and a square floor over
Yeah.
there.
Uh,
So I'm curious your thoughts of what you think is why they would have like the trapezoid features.
right. That's a great question. We honestly we don't know. I would say that on the other side, that if the Patty family had built this, I think they would use 90-degree corners. You'd have squares shaped, kind of shoebox shaped chambers. You'd have square shaped chambers. And we have this trapezoidal thing with a sacrificial table groove, which we only found out 10 years ago. And also by using LiDAR, in handheld LiDAR, there's a $50,000 unit the guy brought up from Connecticut. He lives down in Suffield, Tom Elmore. He came up in 2020 in the spring and started doing 16 acres of the 106 down to a centimeter. And that helped us look at, because he climbed into the chambers with his unit, and he's a landscape architect for 30 years with a master's, and he got involved with LiDAR about almost 7 years ago now. His equipment's made in Canada. The software is made in, the camera, I think the thing's made in Florida. The software is made in Montreal, I guess. And it's a pretty neat thing. It's 16 lasers, got 80 meters out. It has a high definition camera. But he was able to get inside the chambers, and that's how he started seeing the floors. And then we went and took a tape measure and measured them even a little more carefully. They've been measured in the past, but not that carefully. We went inside and we just very, very carefully took our time to do it. But with his LiDAR, down to a centimeter resolution, puts out 300,000 points per square meter. It's high, really high definition. Anyway, you could see that shape, and I don't know if it has anything to do with acoustics. I would say a farmer wouldn't do that kind of thing. They would, again, 90-degree corners, but this does repeat itself. Like I was reading about some of the chambers in England, and they found out there's a trapezoidal shape. I wonder if it's something they liked. You will see that down in South America in some of the doorways and some of the windows, that kind of trapezoidal shape. And that's a question for there too. Why would they not make just a rectangular doorway or rectangular window? Maybe they like the shape of it, Maybe that shape has some symbolism to it too, some meaning behind it. And that's something I can't answer because I don't know. But the Plastow Chamber, which is about 8 miles from here in Plastow, New Hampshire, we went and measured that 2 years ago. We thought it was a shoebox shape. I've been going in there since the 60s. I've probably only been there about 4 or 5 times in my whole life, but in the 60s we went over there, and we got pictures in the 70s of me over there. We went and measured the front and back of it. The guy was going to just measure the middle. I said, try the front and back of that, and we did, and it turned out that it was probably like a foot or so narrower at the front than the back. You say it could be sloppy workmanship, but it doesn't seem to be that. It seems to be intentional again. And again, in England, there's some floor plans with that trapezoidal shape too. And I'm keeping my eye out because there's so many chambers across Vermont and Connecticut. I'm telling people, especially the people with LiDAR, if you're going in there, can you get the measurements? And we'll see if this repeats itself in other chambers. And then the why, we just don't know the why, Why would you do that? But if the table's shaped like that and we have 4 other structures like that, that's a repeating pattern. One might be, well, it's sloppy workmanship. 2, 3, you start to get out of coincidence, I think, at some point. In our site, there's 5 of those shapes, 4 floor plans and a sacrificial table groove. And it's 9 inches narrower at the top on the table than it is at the bottom. It looks rectangular because of the shape, the bell shape of the table. And Goodwin and everybody, oh, it's a rectangle. Get out there and measure it. It's actually, it's 9 inches. It's actually significant. It's actually a trapezoid. I can't answer your question, but that's a great question. Maybe somebody will have some information, say, well, we know some cultures use a trapezoidal shape because of this, and that would be very helpful. Maybe we will have that. Somebody out there, can help us.
Yes, and so my last question for you to wrap this up, and because I know you are an hour ahead of me, and so it is getting late for you. My last question for you, two-parter, is the first part is, what is your goal for, when you, like you talk about, being 72, when something happens and you can no longer take care of, what is your hopes for the Stonehenge property?
Yeah,
And the second part is to give you time to talk about your books.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, I hope it always, you know, um, remains open to the public, kind of like we have now, with more information, and more research, more study. It'd be nice to get some sort of recognition, like a National Register of Historic Places, to put it on the map. They have not yet. I think there's one chamber in Vermont that actually got that recognition, and that was about 10 years ago, and I haven't heard a thing about it since. More recently, UNESCO did the Site Mound, Serpent Mound, Chillicothe Mounds, which is a huge complex, and we've been to those, in Newark Mounds, which is near Columbus, and they're connected by a 200-foot wide road built by ancient people, 65 miles long, Chillicothe and Newark. It's amazing. They just made UNESCO World Heritage Sites. I know my son, I only have one child. He's 37. He's an engineer like my dad. He works at Raytheon. He's worked for L3 and a couple other corporations. He's keeping his fingers in the place very good. He just did all the displays over at Raytheon. He gets every other Friday off. If he's not doing things like skiing with his daughter, my granddaughter, or doing things, he's over there, and he's got an outside project he just wrapped up over there too, a brand new thing outside. But the displays, which were 1994 when we did out the new building and expansion, really needed to be updated. So last fall, through the whole winter, he tore everything out and put everything back in. So he's the next generation. And my granddaughter, she's 5. She's over there a lot. So I'm hoping, and she's very interested in it, but she's 5, And then we have that manager who was with us from high school, and he's working on his graduate work in history, and actually in archaeology. He's been working with the state archaeologists on a couple of digs the last 2 summers in northern New Hampshire. The digs go back almost 10,000 years, and he's got and he worked in the state laboratory too, which is at the airport in Concord, New Hampshire, where I used to take my written test to become a private pilot. That is now an archaeological, it's their office up there. It's like, wow, coincidence. So he's really dedicated to our place for the last 8 years. He was going to go into, he got his bachelor's in criminal law, but he decided to want to stay with us. And he could have gone into the, he could have been a FBI. He could have gone into any law. And he graduated top of his class, and he was a journalist. So he's on my book. He was at the school, one of the school editors, and he helped me finish my book with my daughter-in-law, Katherine, too. But he's kind of the future too. So he's going to be getting his master's in history, but he's working on archaeology too. And he's conducting some stuff at the site with our assistant archaeologist this summer. We have some programs set up. And so that'll be on our website, which is stonehengeusa.com. And if your viewers go to that, they can download our 11-minute video that we show in the theater, and they can do a mobile app. And that mobile app, if you download, it's free. You use it on your iPhone, or you use it on Android, and it will talk to you. It has pictures and text. You can do a complete virtual tour of our site from your lazy boy or your couch. And when you come to our site, if you use it as you're walking, you'll see the watch house on your phone. You'll be looking at it. It will have text, and it will talk to you and give you a nice little presentation of what each feature is as you're walking around. But you can do it at home. So it's a nice freebie. People can go on that and see the site and say, oh, that's something I'd like to see, or I don't care. But you know what I mean? It's a good way to do that. It's all free. We provide all of that.
Yes, thank you. And that is amazing. And do you want to promote all your books or
Well, yeah, I
uh,
just have two. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so the first one my daughter and I did to replace a 1996 souvenir book. So this has nice photographs. It's my first book, and it just has captions with it. And I guess it's going on 8 years already. I can't believe it. But we put that together, replace a 1996 book, and then we spent 5 years putting this book together. The next book coming out is going to be all about the walls, how they twist, turn, and bend, all about the trapezoidal shapes. And we're going to be talking about more about the serpentine walls, the windows, and some of the other wall features and how they compare to others around the Northeast, So it's going to be a book about the same size, the same probably number of pages. I've got 8 chapters written. Now I just got to go through and take all the photographs, and we got to do a lot of editing. And that will be out, I think, probably maybe this winter. We'll have the 3rd book out. But that came out in 2024. And when it came out, Scott Walters was out doing a 2-day event, and the books just came in. So he was out. I was doing my presentation in our theater. He was out front of the theater with a whole counter with his books and his friend Haley's books, and my books had just arrived. So he was out there hawking my book too. And I think he sold my first book for me. So that was in 2024 in the spring, on the spring equinox, as a matter of fact. So it'll be book number 3, probably again in a couple months. We'll have that out. Right now, we're just too busy to get back into editing it and everything. So, but thank you for that. Yeah, thank you very much.
yeah. And congratulations on that. And the link to the website is in the description, and it's also scrolling on the bottom of the screen right now. So, everyone, please go visit there. There's a lot of great information there. And I was on there earlier looking at some stuff, and I have to say, as websites go, your website is like the most user friendly
Well,
website
I'm gonna.
I have
Is that?
ever
It's
come
not me.
across.
Well, it's not me. I'd like to take credit for that, but I have to say my wife and I think James and my daughter-in-law have put a lot of time and effort into that. I give suggestions, but they're the tech people. But I'll let them know that. That is so nice of you, Mike. Thank you very much. That will certainly please them. Thank you.
Yes, it's like I was like, well, where is it? I was like, oh, I'm already looking at it. Oh, never mind. Because you're so used to having to click here to get to here to here. It's like
Yeah,
yours
yeah.
just unfolds, and it's like, now this is a website.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll tell them tomorrow when I get to work. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I know they will too. Thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you for coming on my show and for being a guest. And I just want to thank everyone in the that's watching this, and do follow along, because I say this often, but I mean this with all of my heart. If you come across anything, Dennis, and you're like, oh, this needs to go out to public, please feel free to message me and say, hey, we have a new discovery. Can we use your show to
Okay.
put this out there? And I will be like, absolutely.
Well, we do deeply appreciate that very, very much. And yeah, we keep finding things, so you never know. My phone is down to 2% right now, so I hope I don't lose you. My cord died, my charging cord. So
Uh,
we started at 45%. I think I'm down to 2%. But thank you so much for that. I definitely will do that, and I thank Mark Eddy for connecting us. And I talk to Mark all the time. So if something comes up,
yes,
if I don't, he'll tell you. Thank you so much again, Mike. And I hope if you're back, ever get up to New England, we're only 40 miles north of Boston, right up the highway. If you're in this area, Manchester Airport, where I learned to fly, is only 15 miles. And they got tiny airlines up there too. So we can very easy for people flying in for sure or driving. So, but we're open
yes.
every day, and we do snowshoeing in the wintertime. We open up the entire hill for snowshoeing. Some people can walk right by some of the quarry sites, some of the windows we mentioned, and some of the serpentine walls that you normally don't see on the 16-acre tour. You get to see the whole thing, which is kind of cool. So we're open
That
year
is
round.
cool.
Yep.
And so, last thing I know, because your battery is about to die,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we're this is, I promise, the last thing, and that is
Okay.
from my heart and the heart of my shows to you. Thank you for what you're doing to preserve the history there, to preserve the site, and to, you know, let everybody know what's going on there. And you are doing it from a place of love, and it shows. You're not doing it to say, hey, let's make a buck by, promoting this or this. It's you're actual genuinely wanting to preserve it. So
Oh, thank you. Well,
thank
that's
you for that.
well, that's that's wonderful. That's deeply felt by myself and our whole family. And all the years we've been here, and all the researchers in the past, and all the other people that supported us. So that is so nice of you. But I really appreciate that very, very much. It means a lot. It means a lot to us, because we've been there quite a while, and when you hear something like that, it's very meaningful. So yeah, and you've got to come up and visit us if you're ever up here. I would say the fall is the best, but the hotels get filled up with the leaf peepers. But it's such a nice time. If you can come up here anytime, though, come up and be my guest, and maybe we could do a live show up there. We've done that a few times in the past. It's kind of fun, like
Yeah.
if that works out for you. So, but
I will
enjoy
definitely be in touch.
enjoy the weather in Texas. I know up here it's been pretty nice. It was 80 degrees today and beautiful. So,
Yeah, it was only
yeah.
105 here.
Oh, that's a nice Texas cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time down there with Americans, so I get the feeling. But yeah, thank you so much again. And yeah, I will send you. We find the next thing, and you never know. Like I said, just a couple weeks ago, we found that other window. So if anything exciting happens, archaeologically or whatever, I'll send you a little line, a little message, and I hope to be back on again with some updates.
Well, thank you. And thank you to
Yeah.
everyone. And we're going to end it here. And you never know when he's going to pop in again. So be sure to like, subscribe, and follow along. And do keep an eye on his website. It is worth it. Trust me, there's a lot of photos and great information there. So, with that being said, I'm going to say good night to everyone, and we will see you, I believe, next week for shows. And so, until then, have a great one, everyone. Bye bye.